February 26, 1991. A wall of sand swallows the eastern Iraqi desert, and visibility collapses to a few hundred meters. A single American cavalry troop, 9 tanks, crests a low rise and runs straight into a dug-in brigade of Iraq's Republican Guard. By every rule of war, they are outnumbered, blind, and about to die. 23 minutes later, it is over. The Guard Brigade is destroyed, dozens of armored vehicles burning across the sand. The American troop loses not a single tank and not a single man. This is the Battle of 73 Easting. And the most important thing about it is that it was not a fluke. What happened in that sandstorm was the product of 2 things working together. A maneuver that placed those tanks exactly where the enemy never expected them. And a machine that could see and kill before the enemy even knew it was there. Across 100 hours, that combination would take apart one of the largest armies on Earth. Reach, surprise, and overmatch. Hold on to those 3 words, because by the end of this, you will see exactly how each one was engineered and why together they produced one of the most lopsided victories in modern military history. To understand that sandstorm, start with the map and a problem. In the summer of 1990, Iraq seized Kuwait and dug in one of the largest militaries in the world along the border. Hundreds of thousands of troops, thousands of tanks, layered behind sand walls, minefields, and trenches. Their commanders were certain they knew where the blow would land. It would come head-on, from the south and from the sea. And it was a reasonable thing to expect. A direct assault into those defenses would be a bloodbath, exactly the kind of grinding, costly battle Iraq's army was built to fight. So the coalition made a decision. It would let them keep believing it. Marines and warships massed against the Kuwaiti coast, rehearsing an amphibious landing in full view. It was a feint, loud and deliberate, and it worked. Iraqi divisions stayed locked in place, facing the water, waiting for an invasion from the sea that would never come. And before a single tank rolled forward, the war was already being won in the air. For 38 days, coalition aircraft hammered Iraqi radar, command bunkers, and supply lines. By the time the ground assault began, the defenders were half blind, poorly fed, and largely cut off from their own headquarters. Then came the real blow. Far to the west, beyond the end of the Iraqi line, 2 heavy corps swung wide through open, empty desert. A left hook around the entire flank, aimed at the army's undefended rear, before it could ever turn to face the threat. The defenders were braced for a punch to the face. The fist was already coming around behind their head. The scale of it is hard to overstate. This was the largest armored movement since the Second World War, tens of thousands of vehicles racing across hundreds of kilometers of trackless sand. And almost none of it crossed ground with roads, towns, or any landmark at all. Just dunes to the horizon in every direction. Moving an army through that emptiness at speed without getting lost should have been almost impossible. What made it work was a tool that was brand new to warfare: satellite navigation. For the first time, units could know their exact position to within a few meters, day or night, in a featureless desert or a blinding storm. The void stopped being a barrier. The hard limit on the left hook was never the enemy. It was fuel. A heavy division burns through staggering quantities of it, and the sweep advanced only as fast as tankers could keep the spearhead moving. Engineers and supply convoys ran flat out behind the armor, and the offensive moved at the speed they could sustain. So the trap was sprung. The enemy was fixed in the wrong direction, half blind, and about to be hit from behind. But a flanking maneuver only matters if the units at the tip can win the fights waiting for them. And that came down to the machine itself. At the very point of the spear was a tank that had never been tested in a real war. It was about to define one. The M1 Abrams. 60-odd tons of layered composite armor, a 120mm gun, and a gas turbine engine that pushed it across the desert at highway speed. On paper, it was a strong tank. In practice, 3 of its features combined into something the enemy had no answer for at all. First, the armor. Its layered composite plating absorbed direct hits from Iraqi tank guns that would have gutted almost anything else. There are documented cases of Abrams taking multiple rounds, point blank, and the crews simply continuing to fight. The enemy could land a hit, and it often did not matter. Second, the gun. The 120mm main gun was fully stabilized, which meant the Abrams could fire accurately while moving at speed over rough ground. Its rounds stayed locked on target even as the tank bucked and pitched. Most of its opponents had to stop to shoot. The Abrams did not. And a tank that has to stop is a tank that dies. But the real edge was the third feature, the eyes. Thermal sights read heat, not light, so the blinding sandstorm and the pitch dark of night meant nothing to them. An Abrams gunner saw an enemy tank as a bright, glowing shape against a cold background, kilometers away, long before that enemy could see anything at all. Now go back to the sandstorm at 73 Easting, and it starts to make sense. Lined up against it was the T-72, the backbone of the Republican Guard. On paper, it was a serious tank with a larger 125mm gun. But its optics were a generation behind, its night and thermal capability limited, and its fire control slower. In daylight, on equal terms, it could fight. The Desert War was almost never fought on equal terms. The result was what soldiers call overmatch. The Abrams could identify, range, and destroy a T-72 at distances where the T-72's own rounds would fall short or simply bounce off. And it usually did so before the T-72 crew had any idea they were being targeted. Picture trying to fight an opponent who can hit you from across the room while you can barely make out a shape in the dark, and you have the shape of it. The fight was decided before the enemy knew a fight had begun. And when it fired something brutal. Not an explosive shell, but a long, dense dart of depleted uranium launched at enormous velocity. It did not blow a hole in armor so much as punch straight through it, the impact alone turning the inside of the target into a killing space. Against the T-72, a single well-placed round was usually all it took. And the Abrams never fought alone. Bradley fighting vehicles carried infantry and their own anti-tank missiles. Apache gunships struck armor deep behind the line. A-10 jets hunted tanks with a cannon built around killing them. And rocket artillery saturated whole grid squares from kilometers away. It was a system, and every part of it could see and reach further than the enemy. On February 24th, all of it was unleashed at once. First, the front line had to be cracked open. Combat engineers drove straight at the Iraqi sand walls and minefields, plowing lanes through them under fire, often filling trenches with the bulldozer blades on their armored vehicles. Within hours, they had torn clean breaches through defenses that were supposed to hold for weeks. Through those gaps poured the heavy divisions. Once they were in open desert behind the line, the whole logic of the Iraqi defense collapsed. There was no second wall, no prepared position facing the right direction. The advance turned northeast and drove hard for the Republican Guard, the one force still capable of fighting back. The Guard tried to form a line to meet them. They never got the chance to set it properly. Coalition armor closed faster than the defenders could reorient, arriving out of the storm from a direction they were not watching, with their own attack helicopters ranging ahead to find the enemy first. And so we arrive back at 73 Easting. On that stormy afternoon, a cavalry troop scouting ahead crested a rise and found the Guard Brigade dug in directly in front of them. In the thermal sights, the enemy tanks glowed like lanterns. The order came down, and the troop opened fire while still moving. In 23 minutes, the troop destroyed dozens of tanks and fighting vehicles and shattered the brigade, without losing a single one of its own. It was not a battle of maneuver and countermaneuver. It was a demonstration of what happens when one side can see and shoot, and the other can only sit and burn. 73. Easting was not even the biggest fight. A day later, an entire American armored division collided with a dug-in Guard division along a feature called Medina Ridge in the largest tank battle of the entire war. The pattern held its scale. In a couple of hours, hundreds of Iraqi vehicles were destroyed against a handful of American losses. And there was nowhere to escape to. Above the battlefield, attack helicopters and ground attack jets hunted anything that moved in the open. Iraqi units that tried to fall back found their retreat routes turned into shooting galleries from the air. To stand was to be destroyed. To run was to be destroyed faster. What followed was not so much a fighting retreat as a disintegration. Whole units abandoned their equipment and surrendered in numbers no one had planned for. The Republican Guard, the force the entire offensive had been designed to destroy, was broken in the field in a matter of days. On February 28th, exactly 100 hours after the ground offensive began, the order came to cease fire. 100 hours. In that time, one of the largest armies on the planet had been routed and largely destroyed as a fighting force. The speed and the scale of it stunned the world, including the people who had planned it. The exchange was so lopsided, it almost defies belief. Thousands of Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles destroyed or abandoned against coalition armored losses you could count in many engagements on one hand. Whole engagements ended with one side losing everything and the other losing nothing at all. This was not a close fight that went one way. It was a mismatch in capability, applied at every level at once, from the strategy down to the individual gunner's sight. And here is the lesson that gets missed. The story people remember is the unbeatable tank. But the Abrams was not magic. The point was that the enemy was never allowed a fair fight. He was fixed in the wrong direction, hit from behind, blinded from the air, and then engaged by machines that could see and kill him before he could respond. The decision to stop after 100 hours has been argued about ever since. The stated goal had been to drive Iraq out of Kuwait, and that goal had been met. Pushing on to Baghdad would have meant a different war, with different aims and different risks. So the guns went quiet, with the road north wide open and the consequences left for another decade to sort out. Reach surprise, and overmatch. A maneuver the enemy could not see coming. Hardware that could see and kill before he could answer. And a system where every piece outranged its opposite number. None of the three would have been decisive alone. Together, they collapsed a huge army from the inside out in 4 days. That template, see first, decide first, kill first, became the thing every other military on Earth started measuring itself against. The 100-Hour War did not just win Kuwait back. It reset the entire world's idea of what modern, high-end ground combat was supposed to look like. We have looked at the aircraft that give an air force its reach and the systems built to take that reach away. This time, what happens on the ground when one side can see in the dark and the other simply cannot. Next, we follow the thread further. Watch the horizon. The next move is already moving.